Well, what a tangled rabbit hole we are about to embark down, friends. Jose Baez is the former lead attorney on the Casey Anthony case. Some attribute her acquittal primarily to his strategy of blaming and accusing Casey's father in his opening argument. But many noticed that Jose never presented any information with any kind of supporting evidence to back up those opening statements. Many have asked why this kind of manipulation would be allowed by the court. Jose just slipped it into the minds of the jurors that Casey was terribly abused, leaving that itch in the back of their heads about who George Anthony really was behind closed doors. And then Jose insinuated that George was responsible for what ultimately happened to Kaylee. Again, no evidence. But let's be honest, it worked. The jurors acquitted, and Jose and the rest of the team publicly celebrated what they felt was a huge accomplishment on winning the case. Jose, a menial, under-recognized, and undereducated lawyer before he met Casey Anthony, has gone on to have an extremely lucrative, high-profile career. Now that the docuseries has been released, Megyn Kelly invited Jose on her show and went up against his claims that everything he did in Casey's case was on the up and up.
They call it an opening statement and a closing argument. In the closing, you're allowed to argue. You can argue the facts that the jury has heard. In the opening statement, you're only supposed to be stating what the facts will be when you get the witnesses on the stand, what you will prove to them. And what was controversial about your opening statement is you did not wind up proving, you did not submit the evidence that was in this opening statement, but it was in the jurors' heads, and many believe it saved her. So let's talk about that after I play a little bit of it. Here's what you said in SOT 8 about little Kaylee and how she likely died.
Kaylee Anthony died on June 16, 2008, when she drowned in her family's swimming pool. She saw George Anthony holding Kaylee in his arms. She immediately grabbed Kaylee and began to cry and cry and cry. And shortly thereafter, George began to yell at her, "Look what you've done! Your mother will never forgive you, and you will go to jail for child neglect for the rest of your freaking life."
So why did you never introduce any of that evidence at trial?
Because I didn't have to. Our system of justice requires the government to prove your guilt beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. As a defense lawyer, it's your job to point out the reasonable hypothesis of innocence. Everything I said in there, I had a good faith basis based on the evidence and based on what I anticipated the evidence to show. At no time am I required to put Casey on the stand, and at no time was she required to be put on the stand. But there's a lot of things that prosecutors sometimes argue in their cases that they don't get to prove. And they certainly didn't prove a murder. So no one's going back and asking them, why did you say this and this not come out or anything like that? I can tell you every single word I said in that opening statement, as in with every opening statement that I give in my career, it is based on a good faith basis, based on a lot of what I know that goes around in the background of the evidence. And when I get asked about this case in particular, the very first thing that I tell people is, if Casey told me at any point during that trial or when it was asked upon her whether she would take the stand, "Hey, I want to testify," and I tell her, "Oh, no, you're not," it doesn't matter what I say. She's going to get up there and testify, and it's her constitutional right. So for me to exclude things that I have a good faith basis may come out should either another witness testify to it or she testifies to it, it has to be put out there. Otherwise, I'd be facing malpractice. Imagine all this comes out at the last witness of the trial.
Well, where did you get your good faith basis?
Never have the
I mean, that's I get that, but where'd you get the good faith basis that she drowned in the pool? That she saw, that the mother, Casey, saw her dad holding little Kaylee in his arms? That she immediately grabbed Kaylee and began to cry? This is very specific. she immediately grabbed her and began to cry, and that George yelled at her with the following quotes: "Look what you've done. Your mother will never forgive you, and you will go to jail for child neglect for the rest." Where'd you get that from?
Well, you know better than to ask me those questions. I mean, there's a thing that I respect incredibly, which is the attorney-client privilege, as well as other evidence in the case. You just finished talking about with Vinnie Politan about potential lawsuits. You think I want to drag myself into that when I've got all these other things going on in my life? I'd rather not even go anywhere near that. But I can tell you this: when I say I had a good faith basis, I am absolutely convinced I had a good faith basis. I stand by that today, as I did 11 years ago, and believe me when I tell you, there were numerous facts that came out in that case in evidence that no one ever talks about and no one ever wants to discuss, and I'll just leave it at that.
What do you mean? But finish your sentence. That what? That bolster the drowning theory?
Again, you have to read the transcripts or look at the actual trial. There's tons of stuff in there, and I'd rather not rehash it.
I'm just asking you, what point are you making, though? Like, I'm not going to go back and look at what are you trying to say? If I were to go there, what point would it prove? That she drowned? Or like, what are you saying is bolstered by a review of the transcripts?
Well, there was evidence testified to by our forensic experts as to the potential drowning theory. There was, in addition to that, there was cross-examination that the jury can make their interpretations based on. They're free to believe a witness or not believe a witness based on those questions. And I can tell you this: a lot of the feedback that we got from the jury is they believe certain parts of the evidence. There were statements made at numerous points throughout the trial that raised serious concern about the drowning in the pool. And when I say concern, I mean raise the issue that was certainly a potential aspect. And it's the prosecutor's job to exclude that reasonable hypothesis of innocence.
That's true.
So,
yep.
They knew about the drowning theory since day one.
But she had been telling cops it wasn't true
to exclude that.
I get that, but Casey had told the police that didn't happen. She said that at the time, and to the documentary filmmaker's credit, she actually does include that in this piece. There's an interview with a law enforcement officer saying Casey was adamant that the child did not drown in the pool, and sure enough, Casey today is adamant that the baby did not drown in the pool. She's you may have heard me play for Vinny, but she's like, there's lots of possible theories. That's not one of them. Just to reiterate, I don't want to play it again, but she says lots of scenarios of what could happen. Her drowning in the pool is not one. It is not possible. In most scenarios, it'd be plausible. Not this one. The ladder was not on the pool. It's the only way in or out for her or for me.
Well, you're not going to pin me against my former client's statements. I have nothing to say about that. That's not a case that I'm currently handling. So I'm not going to comment on that, but I can tell you this: if I had a nickel for every lie that was spoken in that case, I'd have been able to retire right after. And sure. I'm not referring to the lies that have to do with Miss Anthony. There were lies throughout that case from multiple witnesses and multiple people on the side who had knowledge and information, but chose to say other things. So having said that, that's really not foreign when it comes to criminal cases, because people have their specific agendas and interests. So you have to look at a case in its entirety and the entire complexity of the case. So
look,
again,
your best argument on that front is the fact that the jury found for you. No one's going to dispute that. Your best argument is that the jury did that and found in your favor. Now, some of them have expressed regrets after the fact and said they regret coming to an acquittal.
I imagine why. I wonder why, with all of the media backlash that they faced and the personal attacks and threats. I don't buy into that. I mean, they made the decision. They didn't know Casey. They're not friends of Casey. They had every reason in the world, given what they were exposed to prior to the trial, to convict her. So to come back and say that later on after the fact, it's ridiculous.
If you're not aware, there are countless rumors about Casey's relationship with Jose Baez, as well as the rest of her legal team. Even in the most recent documentary, it is made clear that Casey still has personal and seemingly odd relationships with her former lawyers and the private investigator, Patrick McKenna, whom she still works for. In the past, acquaintances have come forward to say that Casey told them she paid Jose through inappropriate favors to be her head lawyer. She spent the last several years living with and working for Patrick McKenna. So many boundaries are being crossed with all of these shenanigans. Unfortunately, Casey seems to attract shady people to her. Makes sense, because like always attracts like. But ultimately, I do want to say, when one of the Casey Anthony jurors spoke out, she made it clear that her decision to find Casey not guilty mostly had to do with the prosecutor's lack of clear evidence against Casey. It seemed like the jurors felt confused and unconvinced by the long-winded explanations from the prosecutor's expert witnesses. Also, a big issue was they felt like the state couldn't prove how Kaylee died, so it was difficult to know for sure if it was done with malice or what really happened. But anyway, I know it's all been done and over with for 11 years now, and there's no going back to change things. Still, you have to wonder about the fairness of our legal system when you look at the Casey Anthony case, especially in comparison to so many other cases where defendants are convicted on so much less evidence. And thinking about all the people wrongfully imprisoned or imprisoned for crimes I consider to be much less sinister than what Casey Anthony did, it's hard to stomach. But I hope you'll join me again down another rabbit hole, where I plan to take a look at the interview with one of the Casey Anthony jurors. Thank you for joining me tonight, friends. I hope to see you back again soon.